We started with a container, really, more than anything else. And what was interesting to us looking at that was the sweep, just the way the story has changed over time. We moved from this point where there was a media time, a media thing, this artifact, an actual, something as created and made as a gourd, as a vase, where people actually layered their stories, the things that they had to tell about their time, the things that were important to them and that they wanted to preserve into these objects. And created, and this was the paradigm that existed for a long, long time, in fact.
But then recently, we see things dissolve until they just become a part of the day and a part of your life.
This is a chart from the Kaiser Foundation research that shows minutes per day spent with media among 18 to 24-year-olds, 8 to 18-year-olds, sorry. And I mean, the thing that it shows is the dramatic amount of time that we now spend with media on any given day. And you should note about this chart, moving from 1999 at the bottom to 2009, a decade later at the top. What you should note about it is that all this time is not differentiated time. You're not each one of these, you're not just watching television or listening to music at any one time, but in fact, all of these things overlap.
At almost 700 minutes, that's more than 10 hours, and the only way you can get to 10 hours of media consumption in a single day is to do a lot of things at once, and frankly, to fit it into every little nook and cranny of the day.
And if you think about that sweep of storytelling from BC to now, this is the thing that feels like it's changed as much as anything else. That it used to be bounded. Media used to be a thing, a time that you spent, and now it's everywhere. It's in the ether.
So when we think about designing media, when we've thought about designing media, we've thought about designing the content. Recently, as we've gotten smarter about the web and about applications, we thought about designing how things work, too. We thought about designing interactions and sort of, user experiences. We have to go even beyond that now. We have to design how things look. We have to design how they work. We also have to design how they fit. We've got to figure out what part of that day, what part of that 700 minutes we fit into. And we have to be really specific and really opportunistic about that design.
And in fact, when we say design, what we mean is telling stories, is all the avenues of things that fall into that headline of telling stories, that giant umbrella. We talk about this a lot. So there's this concept, who's familiar with user-centered design? This is a relatively recent phenomenon within design, which is really research-intensive, research-focused, user-focused design, where design team, in every stage of product development, the design team spends tons and tons of time trying to figure out what are the needs and interests of the target user for that thing, and designing to serve those needs. So one of the most research-focused industries, one of the industries that knows the most about its users is the game industry. This is, in fact, a list of the 12 emotions that are most prevalent and most important in the experience of playing games. They're emotions like Fiero, the feeling of triumph over adversity. They had to encapsulate these things, they had to actually look at other languages for words that we don't use every day in English, like naches, the emotion of pride in the accomplishments of one's students or children, naches or kvel. Tell you about game designers because the way that they think about users is actually pretty transformative. Here's an anecdote from a game designer. A critique, really, of his industry, but I think it's fascinating in how it talks about user behavior and how they think about who they serve. I'm going to read this. You can see it all yourselves, but I'm going to read this whole thing out loud. You teach the player how to play the game in 1 minute. Within that 1 minute, you give them in-game money. You make them spend all of that money to buy an investment that will begin to earn them profit. They build a thing. It says this thing will be finished in 5 minutes. Spend 1 premium currency unit to have it now. You happen to have 1 free premium currency unit. The game makes you use it now, so now you have a thing. Now it says to wait 3 minutes to collect that from that thing, so they have a reason to stick around for 3 minutes. When those 3 minutes are up, you tell them to come back in half an hour. You say, you're done for now. Come back in half an hour. The phone sends them a push notification in half an hour. Right there, you're telling them to wait. You're expressing to them the importance of patience. They're never going to forget the way it feels to wait a half an hour after playing a game for 1 minute. They're going to forget the second time they wait for half an hour, and the third time. And then they'll not forget the first time they have to wait for 4 hours, then 24 hours. This is why they'll pay to have things right now. What's among the many things that's interesting about
this is actually amazing. It's actually, if you can, you probably can't guess what is so amazing and actually mind-boggling about this insight. And it goes well beyond anything we ever think about or talk about in the news business.
They've gone beyond, the game designers here have gone beyond thinking about what we typically think of as the handoff between storytellers and their audience. They no longer think of them, they no longer think of their users as the people or the time of the people's day that's just about using their product. They're in fact designing their entire day.
They're designing the part of the user's day that they're not spending with the game. They're essentially reaching out and colonizing even more of it. So these designers are thinking about the hours that you're not spending with their Facebook game, and that's pretty incredible.
They have engineered 8 hours for you to wait and come back. That's something remarkable. I think game designers practice user-centered design very well, but in fact what they're thinking about is really person-centered design. Design that encompasses the entirety of someone's experience of the world, and how do we capture pieces of that? How do we engineer pieces of that, in fact?
Okay, so let's break that down, and we can actually use some of the artifacts that we saw in the Storm collection to think about breaking down a person's day and some of the different dimensions we can use. One of the most important and the most basic is time. When you think about media, you can think about media moments, times of the day that these things fit into. Of course, there's the classic media moments like the morning paper and the evening news, both of which are kind of on the wane. There's a relatively recent media moment that didn't exist 100 years ago and
particularly important to my company.
Might not even exist 50 years ago, and it's the driveway moment, right? The driveway moment only exists because we had cars, and then we had commutes, and then we had driveways, and one particular industry was smart enough to say, that's ours. We're going to colonize that moment. Yeah. And so when you think
pledge drives with CDs that we give you a driveway moment.
It's a thing. Driveway moments are a thing.
Yeah.
So the opportunity for that person-centered design is to think really, again, opportunistically about these new moments that are popping up and asking, how can we claim them? How can we get in there? An even newer moment.
How many of you recognize this snippet of code? Anybody? Anybody? This is the dreaded homepage refresh on news sites. If you started using a news site, or if you've been an avid user of news sites over the past 5 years, you would have encountered the homepage refresh, which is after you're waiting on a news site homepage, say, for half an hour, often less, the page will refresh while you're not looking. As the page is there in front of you, it'll just refresh. The intention of this is so that you can have, a publisher, I'm sure, thought this up, and American Society of Newspaper Editors Convention, or Association of News Editors Convention, back in 2004 said, they are using, all of our users are, they're spending all this time with our websites. They're leaving them open in browser tabs while they go and search for other things. If we refresh the page, that will show a whole collection of page views from that user.
It's smart. It's smart. They identified a media moment.
Exactly. It was sinister, but in fact, if you really thought about that user behavior, I think the marvelous thing about that is that you had publishers thinking in a really holistic way about how their users were engaging the experience of using their sites. But really, if you know that your user's gone away and has come back, why not greet them with something more? Why just refresh the page? Why not say welcome back? I love New York Magazine's Vulture blog, their entertainment blog. When they were thinking about one of the standard assumptions that media companies often bring to, say, mobile is we've got to be in the mobile space. We've got to create an app for our thing. So Vulture, it's a popular blog on New York Magazine, and someone at Vulture said, we've got to have an app. Everyone has an app. We have to have an app. Someone smart said, we shouldn't just have a Vulture app. There are tons of apps for every different media company out there. Why don't we have an app that really expresses or serves an experience? And so they created an app called Clickables. While you're in line, you have 5 minutes to waste. All the things that appear on the site, they're just brief clickable moments, things that you'd want to click on and share. That's the app.
And of course, there's this media moment, which is on the rise when you wake up in the morning, or maybe even when you're going to bed at night. this is the first and maybe the last thing you look at. And this is a new media moment, right? We didn't have these 10 years ago. We didn't have ones this nice even 5 years ago. People are just beginning to colonize those, but there's a lot of space there too to grab onto it.
If you think of any more, tweet them out to this hashtag, Media Moments. Folks have been tweeting there as well, so you might see a few in the search stream. Every night I actually look, many of you might know this website Reddit, which is a web community. Anyone can submit a link or a story or something like that. Every night for the past few months before bed, I'm a big fan of the Gothic horror literature, horror stories, horror movies. And there's this Reddit community called No Sleep. And on my phone at night, I pull up the site before I go to bed to read a few of the campfire stories, really, that people share on the site. Notice the design. Notice that it's built for this environment, really. You can barely see it. Just a Mac icon lit up in a bed at night. That's where you read the No Sleep.
Okay, we can also design for space. When we've thought about space before, we've usually thought about two-dimensional space. We've thought about the space of a newspaper, a broadsheet, a magazine. Now, of course, the space of a screen and how we allocate it and how we make it beautiful. But the truth is that space is diffusing fast. It's taking on another dimension, and it's sort of melting into all the objects around us.
Yeah. We talk a lot about, in design also, we've begun to talk a lot about responsive design, which is now the art of designing really for different interfaces or form factors. So designing a page that works well in a wide web browser, but also works really well in a tiny smartphone screen.
But this is actually very polite, right? Responsive design says, I'm going to wait for you to ask for something. I'll just be here. You know, I'm very flexible. I'm eager to please. If you ask for something with an iPhone, I'll give it to you in exactly the right format. If you ask for it with an iPad, I'll give it to you in exactly the right format for that, and on and on. But it always waits.
It always waits. We're finding that there's all these moments like this. You're stepping on a scale. All of these things, scales now, all of these other parts of the home that don't have screens or never had screens in the past, now they do. They have interfaces. Your bathroom scale has an interface. There are new spaces that have interfaces now.
So if everything has an interface, suddenly everything can carry news, everything can carry a story, even a headline or an image, or something interesting, can carry a clickable. So we would like to suggest that we don't just stop at responsive design, and in fact we don't just stop at being polite, we actually get a little bit more aggressive. We think we should look out into the world, look at all this new territory that's opening up around us all the time, and seize it. Everybody else, the game designers and the app designers and everybody out in San Francisco is going for the same territory, but maybe we can get there first. Yeah. So let's go from responsive design to imperial design.
One would argue that those of us who actually think about communities and civic responsibility do have a duty almost to think about how can we fit into people's lives to colonize those spaces. So another dimension of, we've talked about time, we've talked about designing for space. Another really powerful dimension, of course, is mood, is emotion. The times when you just want to feel a particular way, and that drives the type of media that you seek. So again, this is the game designers' emotion, the way that they've calculated all the emotions that are most important for the game experience. I think you could do the same, you can use many of the same adjectives to describe what we get from media and what we seek from our media. You'd use words like curiosity and wonderment, serendipity and sadness and guilt. In news, we often catalog in media companies, we often catalog our stories, our information by topic, by, say, arts and sports and things like that. But why not actually think about it in some ways as another layer, the way that game designers do, moving from those news and metro and arts and business and sports and opinion to, do you want to be informed? Do you want to be fascinated? Do you want to be surprised?
I love the melancholy link. I feel like I would totally click the melancholy link a lot if it was at the top of a website. Now, some parts of the journalism business actually do this very well. They sort of get a pass. We feel like they're allowed to do it. When the San Francisco Giants win the World Series, the headline in San Francisco is not Giants clinch World Series score, in a blah, blah, blah game last night. It's believe it, because people at the San Francisco Chronicle know that's how everybody feels. And when they pick up the paper or log onto the website in the morning, they want to see something that meets them halfway. at their triumph, at their ecstasy, at their sense of togetherness and community. This doesn't have to just be restricted to sports, though. We could use this in other domains.
Yeah. We know going into the election every year in November that there is going to be an experience. There are going to be, probably 3 experiences. Apathy on the one hand, the majority experience. On the other hand, this feeling of triumph, this feeling that, yes, our candidate has won, we have conquered, triumphant. And on the other hand, this feeling of being disconsolate, this feeling of losing. And if sports reporters and storytellers in sports can think in that way about their users, those whom they serve, why can't we?
So we have to design for fit. We have to decide not just how things look, and we have to design not just how they work, we have to design how they fit into the entirety of a person's life. So we've gone over a few of the dimensions, time, space, emotion. There are actually a lot more. There's a lot of territory here to colonize. There's a lot of territory to seize. There's something like attention. I mean, in a room like this, we actually have a whole spectrum of attention, people hanging on every word. And people tweeting, and people doing email, and people doing all the natural things that we do, sort of in the course of our day right now.
So, sense. We have talked about space and mood and time, but what about the auditory sense? What about when you just want to listen, or when you just want to watch? You just want to watch.
What about posture? We talk about lean forward and lean back. What about like curled up like a hermit crab with your claws on the keyboard? How do we design for that? Or how do we design for something, 90 feet away?
So our point, there are a million dimensions that we could design for that are all about colonizing the parts of a user's experience. This has been where we started, a contained thing, the story that's bound really in an object and in a time.
And we went through many intermediate phases, and what we see, at least what we think we've seen, is that that object has gotten bigger and broader, and it started to disintegrate and started to dissolve until it's just part of the everyday world. This has a lot of challenges involved in it, but it also has so much opportunity, because the whole world, all that time and all that space, is our new canvas. The story starts now.
And it never ends.
Thank you.